began attending Zuri's church, claiming he had been moved by her faith. "This isn't who you are, Baraka." Time stopped. There, tangled in bed sheets, was Baraka, her husband, with another. "No, she's planning something massive. Do something about it before it's too late." Baraka grabbed her arm. "You're not going to ruin me." It was an unusually warm Wednesday afternoon in the village of Mavuno. The sun loomed overhead like a fiery guardian as Zuri walked along the roadside, her Bible tucked securely beneath her arm. The smell of roasted maize and ripe mangoes floating through the air, mingling with the faint echo of a distant gospel hymn. Dressed in a flowy white blouse and a modest blue pleated skirt, Zuri looked every bit the image of grace. A pillar in the local church, known for her unwavering faith and kind heart. She had just left midday fellowship, where she had led prayer for the sick. As she made her way home, her eyes caught sight of a small boy, no older than 9, sitting by a plastic crate of oranges and mangoes. His clothes were torn at the sleeves, and dust clung to his skin like a second garment. Something in his eyes stopped her. "Why aren't you in school?" she asked gently. The boy looked up, startled, then lowered his gaze. "Mama is sick, and we need money," he replied. Her heart ached instantly. Without hesitation, Zuri knelt beside him, gently brushing dirt from his forehead. She asked if she could visit his mother, wanting to offer help, maybe even enroll him in the village mission school, and help his mother find work at the church's daycare. As they spoke, a tall man in a tan shirt stood nearby, listening with interest. Zuri noticed him but thought nothing of it, until he stepped forward. The man introduced himself as Baraka. He said he had also noticed the boy and was planning to speak with him, but admired the way Zuri had stepped in so tenderly. He praised her character, saying the world needed more hearts like hers. His tone was smooth, charismatic, and polished. They walked together to the boy's house, if you could call it that. It was a small, crumbling structure of corrugated zinc and mismatched plywood hidden behind a cluster of banana trees. Inside, the air was hot and thick with the smell of sickness and poverty. The mother, gaunt and barely able to rise, looked up with grateful eyes when Zuri offered to help. Baraka stood quietly behind her, saying little but watching everything. Over the following weeks, Baraka began attending Zuri's church, claiming he had been moved by her faith. He began volunteering, praying loudly during services, and reading scripture with an eloquence that drew whispers of admiration. Slowly, he and Zuri grew closer. Church members saw them together often. At the clinic, with the boy and his mother, leading food drives, reading the Bible under the mango tree behind the chapel. It seemed like God had sent her a partner in purpose. And soon, people began teasing them gently. Zuri would blush, smile politely, and say, "God's timing is the best." But something darker was brewing beneath the surface, and no one, not even the wise old pastor, sensed it. 9 months later, Zuri and Baraka stood before the congregation, radiant in white and peach, exchanging vows in a celebration that felt blessed by heaven itself. The church was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh lilies. Everyone said Zuri had finally met her match, a man who loved the Lord, who cared for the poor, and who adored her deeply. Their wedding was a community event, a beautiful day no one would forget. The first few months of marriage were blissful. They prayed together, worked on church projects, and continued to support those in need. But slowly, things began to shift. Baraka started staying out late. At first, he blamed church meetings or community outreach, but Zuri noticed the smell of alcohol and unfamiliar fragrances on his clothes. Then came the missed Sunday services, the defensiveness, the mood swings. She would confront him gently, with tears, her voice calm, never accusing, only pleading. One evening, Baraka sat on a bar stool under a flickering bulb in a backstreet tavern, confiding in a longtime friend. He twirled a half-empty glass in his hand. I feel trapped, like this whole thing was a mistake, he muttered. His friend chuckled and leaned in. I knew this was just a sham. I told you, with a church girl, that wasn't going to last forever. Baraka didn't respond. He looked down, shame flickering briefly across his features. Divorce was not an option, not for a woman raised by a grandmother who believed in the sanctity of marriage, in bearing burdens, and in trusting God for transformation. But what happens when prayer meets a brick wall, when love bleeds silently into despair? Baraka began disappearing for entire nights, sometimes coming home with glitter on his shirt, a smirk on his face, and no explanation. Zuri kept her pain private. She fasted, she prayed. It was during one of these long, quiet mornings that a knock came at the door. On the porch stood a young woman with tired eyes and a baby in her arms. Is this the home of Baraka? She asked. Zuri nodded slowly. This is his child, the woman said. He hasn't given us a cent in months, she continued. Zuri invited her in and offered her tea, though her hands shook as she poured. The woman admitted that she wasn't aware that Baraka was married until months after she gave birth to their daughter. Zuri could not believe what she was hearing. After a few hours, the woman left the house with her baby. That night, when Baraka returned, Zuri confronted him calmly. He denied everything, as always, but she knew. She saw it in the way he couldn't meet her eyes. She then decided to move into the guest room that night and cried silently until the sun came up. That was when the screaming began, doors slamming, accusations flying. Baraka accusing her of being frigid, controlling, ungrateful. Zuri learned to sleep with her door locked. Her body was safe, but her spirit was slowly dying. A few months passed and she received an invitation to attend a women's Christian convention in the city. A week of prayer, teaching, and rest. It felt like an answered prayer. She informed Baraka with grace. Though their marriage was crumbling like a termite-infested hut, despite the wounds, she never disrespected him. He only grunted in response. Still, she prepared his meals, cleaned the house, and even laid out fresh bed sheets before leaving that Friday afternoon. That was who she was. Faithful, kind, forgiving. Baraka watched her drive away with an emotionless face, unaware she'd be back sooner than expected. On Sunday morning, just as the final worship session was in full swing, the fire alarm rang through the building. A gas leak, the organizers announced. Everyone had to evacuate. Zuri, unsettled by the disruption, took it as a sign and decided to return home early. Her heart felt restless. By early afternoon, she pulled up to their house and immediately felt a knot in her stomach. A car she didn't recognize was parked in the driveway. She approached the house quietly, keys clutched tightly in her hand. The living room was empty, oddly tidy. She walked slowly up the stairs, every step heavier than the last. As she turned the corner and opened the master bedroom, her breath left her body. Time stopped. There, tangled in bed sheets, was Baraka, her husband, with another man. They both froze. Zuri felt paralyzed. The world turned silent. Her mind screamed, but her body wouldn't move. She clutched the door frame to steady herself, then quietly closed the door and ran downstairs. Her chest heaved, her stomach turned. She stumbled outside, bent over, and vomited into the hibiscus bush she once tended with love. He married me. He has a child. Oh my God, he used us to cover up. No, 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 she repeated in disbelief. She felt betrayed in a way that language could never capture. This wasn't just infidelity, it was deception, woven so deeply into her life that it made her question everything: her worth, her marriage, even her faith. Zuri had always believed secrets came to light, but this was a storm she never imagined. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to fall apart, but she didn't. She sat on the front steps, dazed and shivering, until Baraka came down a few minutes later. His face was unreadable. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," was all he said. Zuri looked up at him, her eyes hollow. "Who are you?" she whispered. He took a step closer, but she flinched. For the first time, fear coiled tightly around her chest. She stood and turned to go back inside, but Baraka grabbed her arm. "You're not going to ruin me," he hissed. The words chilled her to the bone. She wrenched her arm free and ran inside, locking the guest room door behind her. That night, sleep never came. She sat in the corner of her room with a chair pushed against the door and a knife clutched in her trembling hands. She didn't know what Baraka was capable of anymore, but she knew he had everything to lose now. His mask had fallen, and she had seen the monster behind it. Or so she thought. The nightmare was only beginning. Days after the discovery, tension hung thick in the air of the house like a storm waiting to break. Zuri, though wounded deeply, carried herself with an unusual calmness that unsettled Baraka. It was not the calm of peace, but of resolve. She decided it was time to confront him, not in rage, but with truth. One quiet afternoon, she found him sitting alone and approached him with a heavy heart. "Baraka, please, change your life," she said softly, her voice steady. She opened the worn Bible she had carried years before their wedding day and read aloud from Leviticus 20, verse 13. Her tone neither accusatory nor trembling, only resolute. Baraka shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away as if the words were burning into his skin. He muttered something incoherent and quickly changed the subject, but the seed of that moment lodged in his mind. Later that evening, unable to bear the weight of her words, he sought out his lover, desperate for reassurance. They met in a dimly lit corner of a roadside bar, the air thick with cigarette smoke. "I told you to leave that woman alone," his lover said sharply. "She's planning something big. Why is she so calm and nice after everything you've done?" Baraka tried to brush it off, explaining that it was just who Zuri was. But the reply was swift and cutting. "No, she's planning something massive. Do something about it before it's too late." The poison of suspicion seeped into Baraka's thought that night and the next. By the following evening, it had taken root and twisted into something dark and dangerous. Zuri, unaware of the storm about to break over her, sat in her bedroom chair reading a novel, her mind momentarily elsewhere. A knock on the door interrupted her. Baraka stood there, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked. She didn't look up from her book immediately, but when she did, her gaze was steady. "There is nothing to say, Baraka. Thank you for showing me who you truly are." Rising from her chair, she faced him squarely. "You need to change your life before it's too late." Her words, meant to plead for his soul, echoed the warning his lover had planted in his mind. The lines blurred in his thoughts. Her appeal twisted into threat. As she brushed past him and headed toward the stairs, he followed in silence, the weight of his decision pressing on him like an invisible hand. She was nearly at the bottom of the staircase when he called out her name. Zuri turned, perhaps expecting one last word, but instead found herself staring at the barrel of a gun. Time fractured. There was no scream, no plea, only the deafening crack of the shot as the bullet tore into her chest. Her body jerked backward, tumbling down the few steps before crumpling on the cold floor. Baraka stood frozen for a heartbeat, the reality of what he had done slowly sinking in. Then, with cold calculation, he moved into action. He ransacked drawers, scattering their contents to stage the scene of a burglary gone wrong. Every movement was mechanical, a desperate attempt to erase intent from the aftermath that weighed on the air. He slipped out the front door, then kicked it inward to mimic forced entry. Satisfied, he raced to his car, heart pounding, mind clinging to the fragile illusion that he could outrun what he had done. The night swallowed him whole as he sped away, convinced that murder was now just another secret he could bury. But the silence of the house behind him was heavy, and somewhere deep down, he knew this was a kind of sin that never stayed hidden. The next morning began like any other for Baraka, or so he tried to make it seem. He sat in his chair, surrounded by colleagues, deep in a staged meeting to appear as though the previous night's darkness had never touched him. The steady hum of conversation and the scratching of pens on paper masked his restless mind until a knock interrupted the proceedings. Two uniformed police officers entered, their faces indistinct. "Mr. Baraka, we need you to come with us to the station," one said firmly. Baraka leaned back in his chair, adopting an air of confusion, and asked, "Why? What's going on?" The taller officer tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on him. "Where were you last night?" Baraka blinked slowly, then replied, "I was here all night preparing for this meeting. Why do you ask?" The shorter officer's voice cut through the silence. "Your home was broken into." Baraka feigned shock, his voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "What? Is she all right?" The officers didn't answer his questions. "Come with us," they repeated, their tone leaving no room for argument. They escorted him through the police station's hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the walls. And then he froze. Standing there was Zuri, flanked by two other officers. Her posture was steady, her eyes unwavering, her presence a living impossibility. Baraka's face drained of color, his legs giving way as he fell to his knees. How, how is this possible?" he stammered, his voice breaking. One of the officers looked at him. "What is it?" he asked. Baraka's trembling hands reached toward her as if she were a ghost. My wife, can you not see her?" he whispered, disbelief dripping from every syllable. The officer's response was calm but sharp. "Yes, Mr. Baraka, she is very much alive." Zuri stepped forward, her footsteps deliberate, and held up the silver locket that now bore a dent. She opened it to reveal the scripture etched within. "His truth shall be your shield and buckler." Her voice was quiet but unyielding. "You tried to destroy me, but God was my shield." Baraka's shoulders sagged, the weight of his defeat crushing him. He was taken away to prison, and though years passed, Zuri never once visited. For her, the locket was more than proof of survival. It was a seal of her freedom. She had survived, not just the bullet, but the man who had once promised to love her. The moral of the story: in a world where love can wear many masks, faith is the light that guides us through the shadows. Kindness opens doors, but wisdom guards the heart. Trust, once broken, teaches us to rise stronger, braver. This is a story of survival, truth, and the courage to reclaim one's life. May Zuri's journey remind us all: No darkness lasts forever, and with God as our shield, no evil can destroy the soul that holds fast to hope. Hello to all my wonderful viewers and subscribers. Thank you so very much for coming back to listen to this wonderful story. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one. Be blessed.
Me love a story to make and storyteller, and the stories them lit. And there's always a twist, African, Jamaican and Caribbean tales. Morals, lessons and them never fail. Jamaican storyteller, and the stories them lit. And there's always a twist, African, Jamaican and Caribbean tales. Morals, lessons and them never fail. I know this might sound crazy, tales by Shanse is my baby.